listen to the author of the book, Angel of Mortality. I give you Mr. David Stewart.
Thank you. And that theme is body, soul, and spirit. How are they distinct and how do they work together? And the way this occurred to me was that when I had Eve, which is the artificial intelligence xenomorph in Angel of Mortality, which is the organism that has artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, and robotics incorporated, I realized you have to have some kind of code of ethics and some kind of code of morality. And ethics and morality come from many sources. Many people think it comes only from religion. The ethics and morality of pagan religions with which I'm familiar, and Christian religions with which I'm familiar, and Islam and Buddhism, and I mean, I've had experience with all of these. They're not the same, and yet they kind of derive from the same principles. And those principles are basically very well stated in Buddhism, for example. Don't murder, don't steal, don't lie. You know, it's very basic. It's basic almost. It's basic all religions, really. And I thought, well, if this artificial intelligence being is going to develop ethics and morality, what is it going to base it on? And of course, that's the question that my protagonist, Raisa, faces when she starts to build this artificial intelligence organism. Is how is she going to control it? Because she's really not going to be able to control it. You know, really, once it starts thinking for itself and reproducing for itself and living outside the laboratory, it's going to take on its own characteristics. It's going to go in its own way. Evolution. You know, we think the human race evolved and that's the end of evolution, but it's probably not. And maybe the next stage of evolution isn't just the development of the body and the soul and the mind, but maybe it has something to do with the spirit. Maybe it has something to do with the essence of what makes a civilization, well, what makes a culture a culture. I won't even say civilization, because civilization is just one definition of culture. I went back and looked at my previous books, Psychic Redemption, Serious Consequences, Within the Wind, and Cabrera Landing, and I realized they all have the same theme. In Psychic Redemption, which was my first book, I really covered it by the fact that Julie Gustafson, the spirit that comes back from the girl who was 16 years old when she was killed, and her baby was taken from her, and she comes back looking for her baby, that's where I first tried to describe a disembodied spirit. And that's when I realized there really isn't quite such a thing as a disembodied spirit. The spirit, it manifests itself. And when it manifests itself, it's manifesting itself somehow through a body and a soul. So it isn't truly it's not a total free flyer. It does have bonds. And then the question becomes, does it still have an ego? When does the spirit give up its ego? Or does it always maintain its ego? And if it does, where does it go? So those were questions I asked in Psychic Redemption. And of course, in Psychic Redemption, I solved that dilemma by putting the spirit of Julie into the body and the mind of Bonnie McConnell, who was a paramedic that she possesses. And together they look for the baby. My next book, Within the Wind, the spirit that Julie planted in Bonnie stays with her a little bit. And there's a conflict, because now Bonnie is pregnant, and basically there is a spirit entity that wants to come back and claim the part of that spirit that came from Julie. In other words, their path is not complete. So Bonnie fights with this all the way through the book. But her real fight is her fight as a paramedic trying to save a woman who has a tropical disease, and they are basically held captive by a Category 5 hurricane that has totally inundated the Florida East Coast. They can't get out. They can't even get out by boat or anything like that. They're basically trapped in a house. And Aggie then carries on into the next book, Serious Consequences, because when Aggie wakes up from the hurricane, she finds out she's been in a coma this whole time. She finds out her husband is in jail, her house is destroyed, the federal government has basically put a stop on all of her funding, and her son is up with a sister-in-law she doesn't like up in South Carolina someplace. So Aggie really wakes up in bad shape. And now she has to try and recover from that. And at the same time, she finds that her husband, LaDamian, has left her something that's very valuable. He has left her the goods on the transnational crime syndicate. So basically, in Psychic Redemption, I look at the disembodied spirit. And within the wind, I look at the remnants of that spirit and the biological challenges. And then in Serious Consequences, I look more at the mental challenges. So those three kind of play at the same theme, but it comes together in different ways with a different person. And the fourth book, which is a fantasy, and I never realized its relationship before, basically involves a cosmic spirit, which is kind of over the other spirits, that comes back and plays a trick on a bunch of people in the regular world. And it takes them back to Florida in 17th century BC, when there were still mastodons and saber-toothed tigers wandering around. And this group of people has to fend with this totally different environment, something they have no experience with, something they don't expect, and they have no idea really how they got there or what they're doing there. And it's really all a game to this cosmic spirit. But the challenges they face are very bodily. I mean, this is a very physical existence they have to live. They have to figure out how to make fire, they have to figure out how to get food, they have to figure out how to get protection, how to keep themselves alive, and how to work together as a group coming from different times in history of the human race. So it's a very physical challenge for these people. Well, when I wrote Angel of Mortality, the challenge, like I say, is more with the artificial intelligence robot. And how does it establish its ethics of morality, and does it have a soul, and does it have a spirit? Well, my basic premise in all the books is that the soul is really the capability that the spirit brings to the body. The soul is kind of the amalgamation of the spirit and the body. What makes us an individual is kind of what we bring in from the spiritual sense to the body that we live in. And that soul, when we die, probably dies with us. And the body, we know, dies with us.